been the grant writer there for the past 3 years, but we have not done too much through Shapiro, so I'm looking forward to learning more about how that process works.
I'm Christine Nelson, town planner in Old Saybrook. I often write grants to various state agencies and nonprofits, and I'm a new member of the Historic Preservation Council that gives out grants.
My name is Yukshan Lee, and I'm the grant manager for the town of Wyndham, and I'll be looking for grants to rehab the Wyndham Inn and the town hall.
Elise Barrio, I work for TRC Environmental as a consultant. We work very closely with Connecticut Children's Health and Homes Program and HUD funding, and just here for those reasons and personal reasons as well.
I'm Dick Becerra from Madison. I've been on a few committees to convert our old Academy Street School into a community center. And we're in the sort of last phases of the committee's work to get it on the CIP. And we'll be looking for alternate sources of funding to convert the building.
I'm Channing Harris. I'm a landscape architect with a private firm locally, but I'm also on the board of the Haven Preservation Trust, active on several committees, and I'm also a board member of the Friends of Grove Street Cemetery, which is a tough place to raise money for. Cemeteries generally, and landscapes from the burn perspective, as much as we love all the trees.
I'm Bob Halstead from Bridgeport. I was the director of Washington Park Revitalization Project, which secured funding for 35 units and 13 vacant mansions. Got the National Preservation Award using historic tax credits.
My name is Ruth Martin-Schroeder, and I work for Historical Technologies, which is a nonprofit of Suffield. And I am, we're basically looking for grants to survey and preserve some small industrial sites here in the state of Connecticut, right?
I'm Amy Milwaukee with Coastal National Historic Park. Most of the grants that I read are internal, but they're still.
My name is Debbie Walters, and I'm from Waterford. I'm on the Historical Properties Commission, and I'm also with the Historical Society. And we have buildings to take care of, and we just recently had our first experience with grant writing, and we just received a grant from the 1772 Foundation, so we're very excited. But we need to know more about how to do this.
I'm Michelle Pedro. I'm also from Waterford. I'm also with the Waterford Historical Society. And again, we have buildings that need to be kept up, and we need to learn about that. But I also have a personal interest in a few cemeteries. One's in Montville, and there are reasons they need to be kept up because there are like 5, different wars represented, and it's a shame if it would disappear. So.
My name is Tira Penn. I'm the town planner for Thompson. I'm new to the position and the profession, so I have no appreciable grant writing experience, so that's why I'm here.
Hi, I'm Jose Geiner. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Brookfield, and our town council has given us the go-ahead to try to become a certified local government. So I'm here to learn what resources are available. One of the first things we need to do is get a local inventory. It's going to be a big task.
I'm Laura Boyer. I'm an architect with Nelson Edwards Company. I do a lot of preservation work, so I have experience writing grants for clients. I'm also on the board of the Institute Library in New Haven, which needs a lot of expensive envelope work, and we're writing a lot of grants for them writing. Yeah. So.
My name is Andrew Norton. I'm from Colchester. I recently become the chairman of the board of the Bacon Academy Board of Trustees, which is our old high school, and I think it's the oldest high school in the state, maybe certainly one of the few oldest in the country, 1803. Our first graduate was Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas. He was a Durham boy. And the building could use work. And I have no grant experience.
I'm Claire Frisbee, I'm from Portland, and I'm on the Historical Society. I've been the major mover of preservation in the town, and I have recently started with some others the Hart Jarvis Revitalization Alliance to preserve Elizabeth Cole's childhood home in town.
I'm Erica Tall. I'm the new seasonal employee at Purdue's Grand Museum. I have no great experience.
I'm Rick Weiss, Gardener Architects. We do preservation work and also on the board of Connecticut Trust.
I'm Susie Gilmore, the Executive Director of the Lockwood Matthews Mansion Museum. We have been the successful recipients of several grants from Shapiro and Connecticut Humanities and other organizations. However, we also have received our share of rejections, so we need to keep learning and keep moving forward.
I'm Rosemary Salzbach, I'm the Operations Officer at the Nathan Museum. And we have two properties, one at 114 Whitney Avenue and also the party Morris has out in Morris Cove. And I'm constantly looking for the best and most efficient way to deal with a lot of maintenance and deferred maintenance that we have. And we've been successful in writing a number of grants, but there are always needs that need to be filled.
I'm the Royalty Shippo staff and Historic District Commissioner here in Maiden.
I'm Ginny Bennon with Wilton Historical Society. I have no grant writing experience. I'm on the board and I am interested in figuring out ways to get more and let somebody else write them.
Well, I think we can help everybody out. It's a pretty sizable crowd, and I'm sure you all have lots of specific questions. But it's great to see representation from nonprofits, municipalities of all kinds, not just historical societies. So I asked these three panelists because they each bring sort of a distinct talent. Scott, of course, is a funder. Claire is a recipient, but also. Have you ever actually been on the other side of the fundraising?
I have in some cases,
Yeah.
just like reviews of proposals as favor.
Right,
Not
like
as
peer
paid
review or
for.
something, okay. And then Liz, I turn to her a lot when I'm reviewing the applications that come to our office, so I thought she'd be a really good source of insight. So, as I said, this is gonna be Q&A. We do have a little exercise towards the end. We have about a little under an hour, so we've got some time, so that's good. But I'm just going to kick it off with a general question to the whole panel, and just ask what are your one or two best tips for writing a proposal? What?
Can I start? Yes, absolutely. I want to start in case their tips are my tips. So there's two tips and they're completely interrelated. And so we have a wide range of skill sets in the room and a wide range of interests. So I just like to start by saying some people will have more specific questions, and if we don't get to the specific questions about funding availability, although you're welcome to ask, we are here and you can talk to us throughout the day about that, okay?
Find us at lunch, sit next to us at lunch, we're here.
And all SHPO staff can talk to you about SHPO funding. But my top tips are, the first one is to have someone else read your grant application who knows nothing about either your organization or the project that you want to do. Because the biggest shortfall that I have seen in grant writing is that it's sort of twofold. One is that you know your institution really, really well. So you are not always the best person to actually read your narrative and decide if it's compelling or if all of the information is included. And by the way, neither are any of your other board members, if you're doing a good job with your board. So have someone entirely outside your organization review it because they'll be able to say, wait, you forgot this huge missing piece. I don't even understand what you're trying to say here. And you will avoid so many potential missteps. So I'll just stick with one for now.
That's a really good one to start off with. And I'm going to start off with another very, it seems like it would be just second nature, but read the guidelines, if there are guidelines, and read them again. And I have my rule of thumb is that you can, for people who want to learn about grant writing, there's a bachelor's, master's, and PhD. And the PhD is don't follow the guidelines. Write it in scholarly language, get rejected, and write it again in 5th grade English. And also bring your passion. I was just thinking about the wonderful words that we just heard, and how often I fall into this pattern of being stuck at my desk trying to do this work. And so many of you out there are wearing all the hats, and you don't have a team like I do, you're it. And it becomes drudgery. So to really break it down into bite-sized pieces, take a bite out of the elephant, don't be afraid, and just really, I forgot my thought there. I lost my thought. Something about passion. Bringing the passion, I said 5th grade English.
Take a bite out of the elephant.
Take a bite out of the elephant and break it down into manageable pieces so it doesn't seem so huge. And really, it's the only way to learn about proposal writing, if you haven't, is to do it and to just start. But first and foremost, read the guidelines and read them carefully, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Sometimes I cringe at how many times I've had to call Scott or Mary or Liz, and with questions that I'm not even sure if they're really viable questions or if I should have really understood this as the proposal writer, but and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't hesitate to ask, because I look at it as, I was told early on that if you ask these questions, you're helping the funding agencies to give away the money. They're an advocate. They want to give the money away appropriately, and by asking the questions, you're doing the best possible job you can to put in a good proposal.
I'd like to second that. If people would just call and ask questions, because as Claire said, it helps me because I need to present the applications as recommended to our council, and sometimes I feel like I'm in court, So the more information I have, or the more insight, the more I've gotten to know you as the applicant, the better I can advocate for your application. Sorry, Scott.
No, but that really connects to my first point, which is to establish a relationship as best you can with the funder. You can do a grant application many different ways. You can just submit it in the blind and hope for success. You will not be nearly as successful if you reach out to the program officer, and many times our names are on our websites in the guidelines that we're encouraging you to print out and read. I know we live in a world where we can do everything digitally, but printing out a copy of things and marking it up and reading it is really helpful these days, and circling the name of that program officer. Inviting them to have a conversation with you at worst, and at best a face-to-face meeting. I'm one person at an organization that's getting grants from 169 cities and towns, but I really try to make the time to have a phone call, go out to your site when I can, have you come to me when I can't, and have that face-to-face. And when you establish a relationship, like with Regan or Christina or Susie or the other Claire that's in the room now, when you get that grant application or you get that next call, I know who I'm talking to. I have a picture of them in my mind. I have a picture of their site in my mind in many cases. And it just starts to establish that relationship so that we can best serve you and give you the best advice possible as a grants officer. And in turn, you'll end up with a much more successful application. We can work in just a world of emails back and forth, but there's a personal nature to doing grant writing that I encourage you to take advantage of and to try to have those relationships. It will only come back in multiple fold in dollars, and not just in dollars, but other recommendations, because I know my world, but I know other funders' worlds and can make recommendations. Made a recommendation last year to Keeler Tavern about a good to great grant, and they got a good to great grant. So sometimes it's not just the relationship with that funder you're starting that's going to have direct, but it's going to have indirect relationships to benefit as well.
That's another tip. Funders talk to each other.
Great.
I've got one more question, and then I think we have people in the room that definitely want to, and these are elementary, but just to kind of get you started. So conversely, without naming names, what's the worst mistake somebody could make? It might just bounce off of the first question, but are there any things to just not do or avoid when you're preparing a proposal?
You want to start?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gets to what Claire said, but there are many funders that are out there. There are many funders that have overlapping interests. But if you don't really know who the right funder is for the project at hand, and you are going to be doing the shotgun approach and just using the same application, the same narrative, and throw it out to 15 different funders and hope that something sticks, you might get a grant. Maybe you'll get 2 grants. You're not going to be successful. The effort and the time is not worth it. Learn which funders there are. Learn what the distinctions are and what they fund, and there are distinctions. The Historic Preservation Office does bricks and mortar. We don't do bricks and mortar. When you're done with the bricks and mortar and you want to start telling the story of that place, we can help you with telling the story of that place. But if people come to us for construction projects, they're going to be kicked out right off the bat because we don't do that. There are other places that do. And then there are the things in the guidelines that if you read, you won't ask me for, but people still ask me for. I cannot fund food and beverage. It's a very simple one. We are given money from the state of Connecticut to re-grant out. The state of Connecticut prohibits us from granting out money to have receptions. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You're not going to have a great exhibit opening without having the reception. You can use that reception as match for your grant to me, but I can't pay for it. And if you ask for it after you've submitted, I can't say, well, you could shift that $150 to X, Y, or Z that's another part of your budget that we could have funded. So there are those things that you could either read and solve on your own, or if you work with a program officer to connect to my earlier point, I'll make recommendations of, great, shift A and B, and you'll be more successful, or you'll get more money than you would if you just submit blindly.
Go ahead, you go.
I love the question, why should I care? With every proposal, we try to answer that. Come from a perspective of the reviewer reading this, why should they care? And I have people in my job that come to me from all different areas of Mystic Seaport. It's either the shipyard where they're preserving ships, or the collections area where they're cataloging collections, or Williams Mystic program where they're teaching. And so someone comes to me with an idea, and that's the first question that comes into my head is, you need to be able to answer that for yourself and to put that into words. But that's like an index question for me. It's if you can't answer that with passion and enthusiasm, you probably don't have a project that's going to be fundable.
And I'm just going to jump in here because there is kind of 2 parts to writing grants in my mind. There's a descriptive exercise and there's a persuasive exercise. And you need to be good at both halves of the equation. If you're the most persuasive grant writer and narrative that you put there, and you tell everyone why they should fund this project, but you never tell them what the actual project is, you're missing the other half of it. Or if you can tell them nuts and bolts, and I understand the mechanics, I know the dates and the times and every individual, but you haven't made, like, why should I care, to Claire's point, you're going to be equally unsuccessful. You have to do a little bit of both. So this is where sometimes, as Liz was saying, having those outside people look at it, you can start to see, did I answer all the things that are so obvious to me that I didn't even think about describing them in the proposal? Or as Claire said, have I been persuasive enough? Is this going to stand out in a round of grants where at Connecticut Humanities we can get 3 or 4 times as much money requested in the deadline as we have available? And we have to make tough choices. And those tough choices end up coming back to, have you told us why this project should rise above the rest? And have you spoken to our own funding priorities? And organizations have and outlined their funding priorities of, when you've got 5 grants that are all equal in front, how do you help decide which one gets the access to the funding first? And that gets to that part of the persuasive argument.
So I'll go in 2 routes. I'll go one that's a more preservation related route, but also one that is a kind of a compelling piece of information that you really need to have. And that is, understand who your audience is when you write a grant. Wow, we are doing really good. Understand who your audience is, because to talk about, number one, don't make the reader assume who your audience is, because everyone is generally not your audience. And that sometimes requires deeper thinking than is even comfortable to have. But if you can tell us that you have done planning, even if it's not a full-fledged strategic plan, I'm all like, yeah, great, I have a strategic plan. You have 2 pages of strategic thinking for your organization that talks about where you want to be or what you want to get done in a year and a half. I'm pretty okay with that if it's really strategic thinking. But to say that a family program will grow your audience because of X, Y, and Z, or this kind of program, conversely, a storyteller will grow your audience by X, Y, and Z without telling me what audience it is you want to grow, I'm just going to think, yeah, you're just shooting. You're shooting in the dark, and you probably do know why. Right? So that's one thing. And then on the historic preservation side, and there is definitely a difference between bricks and mortar projects and humanities related projects, and we do a little bit of both, but this critical element is sort of a continuum of process, I think. The beginning, the middle, and the long middle, and the end, I think is really, really important. So we need to know in a historic, if you're going to be doing, if you're going to be applying to the HRF fund, our Historic Restoration Fund, one of the things that we need to know from you is that you have already had the documents in place that give you the meat and potatoes, tell us why you need to do that project. And I'll give you an example. So let's say you have a building and 2 years ago, you had a roof leak, and so you re-roofed the building. And now you're having gutter problems and drainage problems, and the mortar is not curing correctly, or it's beginning to crumble. We have to say, okay, we get that you went back and fixed the roof, but did you ever do a plan that said, the roof is great, but if you don't fix these other things, and maybe some of the other things first, this good roof is not going to be so good. So it's really this idea that you talk to your funders about, is there anything that you see, because the funders sometimes, in the case of SHPO, have a degree of expertise. Is there something you see that we should be doing before we do what we think we should be doing?
Can I piggyback off of that too here? Because that just reminds me, listen to what the program officer tells you. And it sounds simple, but if we tell you something like, well, you could come in for that, but, or, you've given me 3 ideas, and I think that number 1 is the most likely path of success for you, or, you ask us to read a draft and we give you some specific advice of answer this question, answer that question, and you don't do those things, or you go with project 3 when they recommended project 1, or they kind of don't tell you don't come in for a grant. It's often, sometimes we do, but oftentimes we say, you could be successful, but, and you still go forward, just know that you're probably not going to be as successful as you would have if you took the advice, went with the other project option, wrote the answers to the questions that they were recommending you answer that you hadn't answered before.
Planning is your friend. So we often get grants that are very, we have an emergency now. And we will work with you if you have an emergency now. We want to help you, and we can help you. But we would really like to be helping you before you have an emergency. Because by the time you have an emergency, often things have got to stop and just be, what you want to do has got to be just put into a holding pattern, so the other things that you needed to do, that we were dying to work with you beforehand to help you do, are just not in place.
And grants can't help you tomorrow. You cannot find probably a grant funder that you could apply for today and have a check in hand tomorrow. There is a timeline to this. Even the most responsive of grant lines are probably not gonna get you access to money, for us at least, and for many, a month to 6 weeks out from the time of application. And the time of application isn't from today, it's from when that application deadline hits. So you have to start to plan out ahead and put a calendar in place, because you're right, when that emergency hits, if you're waiting till then, it's too late. You've missed the opportunity to be proactive and you're being reactive. And you still have to wait that timeliness to resolve the problem in most cases. There might be some emergency access to funds, but it's not the same pot of money and it's not the same access that you would have if you did it proactively.
Great answers, this is good. So does anybody have a specific question that they would like to ask?
I would like to ask about, when you were saying, let's say you had the roofing job and you did have either, you folks had already made a recommendation for the repair of the building. And so step one was we thought we should do the roof. So we financed the roof ourselves. Second, but now we have a problem with the siding or something. And so maybe nobody had anticipated that. So now we need the money for the siding. So am I going to, in the grant, I'm going to relate to you our thinking process that we started with the roof as recommended by maybe you folks or by a contractor or whatever, and we didn't anticipate this other issue. Now, many times the grant doesn't ask for photographs to document the whole process, and I'm inclined to want to do that, but I've refrained from doing that. But I think photographs are so helpful to let you see firsthand what we're trying to accomplish and the repair that we need to make.
Do you want me to take that, or do you want to take that from being an applicant?
Well, I just wanted to add one thing which has helped us in the past, and that is that to have if it's possible, to have the people from the granting agency come for a site visit so you can show them.
Oh.
It's not always feasible for that, but if you can get them down, your site visit is always going to be a wonderful way to get that, to really understand and get their feedback on how you structure a scope of proposal.
I see.
So, and that is a really good question, and we get that kind of question a lot, and we also get applications which come from people who've been in the same situation that you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
So at the State Historic Preservation Office, we have many different kinds of grants, but we have two that in particular, and one is called a Survey and Planning Grant, and then one is called a Historic Restoration Fund Grant. So what we're hoping is that, and this goes into this continuum of grant making, and Mary, if I start telling people things that are wrong, you're supposed to be like, oh Liz, let me just interrupt, okay? And that is that you come in for a survey and planning grant, and when you come in for that grant, that can be for something like a conditions assessment for your building. So the hope would be, you take a look at your building and you know that your building, it's gonna need work in the next 5 years, something bad could happen, we better get moving on a project. So rather than calling in, especially if your building is, so for SHPO funding, your building has to be on the state or national register to be eligible. And that's not necessarily individually listed. It could be a contributing resource in a state or national registered district. And we can talk to you more about that offline. But if you meet that qualification, what we would love to do is help you to apply for a survey and planning grant to get an assessment for your building.
When you can do your homework and you can have the assessments and the plans in place ahead of time to be able to articulate to the funder, we are tackling this project now because we did a historic structures report, we did a building assessment, we did a strategic plan, whatever the right assessment is for your series of projects, and this was the top prioritized need, or we've done needs 1 and 2 and now we're on to need 3, it will help your case overall. And that said, you could say when the unforeseen happens, we've been doing our homework. We've done all these assessments, we've done all these plans. Something that came out of left field has hit us despite our best efforts to try to be doing things the right way. Now we need help, and that's why we haven't done this, because we've been doing all the things that we've been told to do, and still the siding had an issue that we weren't expecting, that the assessors didn't come to us with. It's much more compelling when you have things that you're trying to do right, and you can tell the funders you've been doing your best.
Okay.
Yeah, for anybody in the room that's working with an historic building right now and contemplating getting funding, I'm gonna make a pitch for one of the afternoon sessions, which is working with contractors, developing an appropriate scope of work. On that panel will be actually the chair of our Historic Preservation Council, who's always offered great advice on how, just where to start. So are there any others? Yeah, Nelson?
Nelson Teresa, town of Enfield. We have a historic structure in town. It's actually one of our villages that's listed on the National Register of Historic Places, village known as Hazardville. It's along Route 190. We actually had Shapiro out there a few months back to look at the structure, the Hazardville Institute. It's a contributing resource, as Liz mentioned, on the National Register. So, I mean, technically it's eligible for the Historic Restoration Fund grant. Now with this structure, we've done the conditions assessment. We're at a point where we've done the plans, we know what the issues are. And right now, the town owns the building, but there's a lease, a long-term lease with a nonprofit, the Hazardville Institute Conservancy. And right now, the issue isn't, well, there's a lack of funding. The town's committed up to $300,000 towards the restoration. We needed to do a small addition in the back to do some ADA compliance improvements. Right now, the issue isn't what are the unknowns in terms of the rehab. It's what they want to do with the building, ultimately. I mean, it was formerly a public space community center, and now, I mean, they want to produce income, but they also want to continue using that space since it's in the center of the historic village as a community area. But they don't have the vision right now of what it wants to be. So I was looking at this Connecticut Humanities Fund. You know, I don't know if this nonprofit would be eligible for any of these grants to do building capacity assessment of the, strategic planning. Also, there's an issue with parking. Since it's an historic structure, the building itself didn't have any parking. And the town does own some property in the back that could accommodate for some parking, but we haven't planned that out yet. So again, we know what the assessment of the building itself is to get it restored, but the issue is the end use and what it can be. So I just wanted to know whether or not there's any.
And Nelson, I can talk to you more afterwards about the specifics, but in general, when you get to that end use and you want to start telling your community stories, your history, the culture, that's where Connecticut Humanities and our funding come in line. And we can help you from the planning stages where you know exactly what you want to do and the implementation of doing that specific thing, or more broadly where I think it's where you are, and that's where our capacity building grants are designed to do, to talk to audiences, to do your homework, to figure out where you go in many different directions, strategies, and what the right directions are.
Okay.
Again, that's broadly for you all, and we can get into the specifics. And in some cases, we will be that right funder. In other cases, there might be a few other steps before us, and we can help direct you accordingly.
Mary, do you want to talk about adaptive reuse a little bit?
Yeah, we can, Humanities would be great at helping you tell the story, and we can help you figure out, not what the story will be, but we give feasibility studies for adaptive reuse of historic buildings. So that might be a place to start to see what that building could be reused for, what would be appropriate, and then once you decide on what you're going to use it for, you could go to Scott for programming.
Yeah, and these things work hand in hand too. I mean, you can come up with this great idea with us, but you find out that you don't have the weight-bearing load of the building to do it. So that would not be a good way. But they could tell you all the things. Well, you have all of these functions to be right, all these functions to be wrong, and then you could work with us on making those things a reality.
Adaptive reuse, we usually have about surveying and planning.
Yep. Yeah.
So I think one of the things that's coming out is, and we're trying to do this in a much more effectual way, is our funders, Connecticut Humanities gets money from the state of Connecticut. Obviously, the SHPO gets some money from the state of Connecticut. We have federal funds, but we're trying to work together to begin to create a point where we can help you kind of seamlessly, but more effectively envision a total project. And I think what I would like to say is we would like you to use us that way.
Yeah, and we're missing one leg of the wheel here too, which is the Connecticut Trust as well. How many of you have had a circuit rider come out and look at your sites and talk to you about your sites in the CT Trust? All right, we've got several hands, but I would love to see more hands because they're another piece of this. They are an organization that gets funding from SHPO to have people that are boots on the ground, can come out, give advice, look at your building, make recommendations about the projects and the products that they have, the state has, other people like other funders like Connecticut Humanities has. So again, that's another part of the whole, to have that relationship with Brad and with the two new circuit riders to get them to know what you have and get their recommendations and thoughts on what's next.
In support of that, I would just like to say, as a person who just wrote her first grant and tried to follow the directions, Brad did come out to our site in the very beginning. We weren't even sure who we were talking to tell you the truth. But he went through it's an old schoolhouse and it's gonna need a new roof. And he was terrific, And in addition to that, and he did say this would qualify for that grant. And when I was going through the application process, so worried about, what was I gonna do right or wrong, he had said to call him. And I'll tell you, you call him, he gets back to you, and not only did he answer my questions, but as I'm like telling, because I'm a storyteller, and this is why we chose this roofer. And he said, you know what, stop. You need to write that story into your application. So he was so helpful. So really, they're telling, listen to what they're saying because, ask questions. I felt silly in the beginning, but ask questions, they're very helpful.
Good, that is good. And Ginny I'm going to get Ginny, you're next, but definitely use the circuit riders. And if you don't know how to get a hold of them, just ask me or anybody, and the trust is here today.
We will bring you to a circuit rider.
Yeah. If you work in a building, if it's old or historic, that's where you should begin if you need help with your building. Wilton.
I have a question. You're talking mainly about the edifice of the built environment. I'm wondering, can a program like you're saying take into account how to use your plant, the interior of your plant, to enhance your programming, to incorporate technology uses, to reuse rooms in another way. It's a major project to do that for attached buildings that, kind of don't work together naturally. And I'm not sure, our board certainly, and our staff doesn't have the knowledge or the time to incorporate what's new or what's feasible. Would this kind of a grant be?
Yeah, yes. So at Connecticut Humanities, we can help you, whether it be at the capacity stage to start to look at a space that you feel is not currently serving your audience as best as it can, or telling the stories you want to tell, figure out the best ways to reuse that space and how to better leverage it to meet your community's needs. And then when you figure out what those plans of attack are, our grants could also help you do them. The planning for it, maybe you still need to do some research or bring in some consultants who do technology or can help you design the space because you've got wonderful skill sets at your organization but not all the skill sets you need. And our planning grants can help you do everything to become shovel ready. And once you are shovel ready, our implementation grants could help you to do the fabrication and make the physical changes in the space to tell that story. So for all of you, those are kind of the ways our grants work. And our grants can work so that you have 3 grants that all connect to the same project, or you could just come in at the different stages that you're ready for us. Here at Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford, several grants from us to figure out how they can tell the story of a house that, again, was a traditional historic house, but didn't connect to all of those important issues and things that they wanted to tell about the writing, Uncle Tom's Cabin, slavery, race issues in America. That didn't really hit when you were in a kitchen. So we helped them figure out through the planning and capacity building stages what they wanted to do, and then when they wanted to roll it out, transform those spaces. They still have some period rooms, you could still see a bedroom, but they turned some other rooms, historic house rooms, into gallery spaces or discussion spaces where people are just gonna sit around and talk with one another about the difficult issues that are we're grappling with as a nation today, and that tie back to the themes and issues of those books. So those are some of the ways that our funding comes in to help you transform spaces.
I just want to add a note to that answer, and that is especially because I know Wilton Historical Society. Once you've received a grant from the SHPO's office, those grants often, if they are for bricks and mortar, do come with an easement. So as you're thinking to the SHPO's office, because obviously the state is giving us money, the state is making this investment, so the state being who it is, wants to have some kind of interest in your property moving forward, so we can make sure that this investment doesn't just disappear. So as you're thinking about changing interiors, especially if you're in a building that is historic, we're very supportive of you thinking about how to reinterpret your space, especially to up your visitation. I mean, tourism is also our buddy. I mean, their desks are a few feet from ours. So we want that, but we want to make sure that the changes are made in a thoughtful manner. So if you begin to change historic interiors or think you want to be doing that via working with Connecticut Humanities grants, make sure that you continue to think of this big continuum. So that we can protect these resources in the very best way possible. There's a lot of brain power in our world and a lot of years of combined experience making these things happen. And we're always happy to work with you or to put you in touch with, give you lists of consultants who do these things really, really well.
Okay, and we have like a little over 10 minutes left, so this is great. So, question.
I have a follow-up on the easement. If we went for a historic restoration grant to restore a large part of our building, it's a historic building, and then we decided that in order to make the building sustainable, we were going to rent an office on the 2nd floor. In terms of the preservation easements, how would that affect it? How would you look at it? How would you evaluate that?
I'll take that one. Well, you definitely need to contact our restriction coordinator. It depends on what the integrity of the rooms is at, currently. And we would just want to take a look at your plans and make sure that to the best extent possible, they meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. But I'll tell you, if you've got a space that is no longer historic, there's a lot more flexibility, but we still need to take a look at what you've got planned. So just do it before you get started. But it's not a automatic no. It's not like you can't do anything.
And if you're not going to do anything and you're just going to rent the upstairs and they're not going to do anything, then that's fine.
Yeah, if you don't need to make any changes, the use we're not concerned about. It's how that use,
if it
affects. Yeah.
And a great new window.
Yeah, don't do that.
Right. So Paul.
Yeah, just a quick question. When you have a nonprofit organization that is leasing a building from a municipality for $1 a year kind of arrangement, who is the applicant, or who has to be the applicant?
Well, either or. As the owner, the municipality can be the applicant, but if you're in a long-term lease of 20 years or more, then you can be the lessee can be the applicant.
Okay.
So, but you do have to have a lease in place. And obviously, between you and the municipality, you should make sure they're okay with you, doing that.
Right. I didn't know if there was a tipping point on the type of work that was being done that you'd had to have one or the other. Because sometimes it's sort of the criteria is sort of your nonprofit, it's a listed building, all that kind of stuff, you're in there, you're using it, and you want to have something preserved, but it, you know, depending on how it's worded, or funding availability. If it's a municipal grant, it's a much higher availability for some of the programs than it is just for a regular organization, so.
I mean, it doesn't really change the guidelines or what we're likely to fund. We just wanna know if you're leasing the building, we need to know that you've got permission from the owner, the municipality, but you can be the applicant and you can direct the project and you can, you know, do, it's really between you and the owner of the building, but you can certainly apply for funding from us if you don't own it outright. And, I'm sorry.
Bob Holster from Bridgeport.
Okay, after Bob.
Had a SHPO come down, there was a 1920 library, which is a landmark library that's not been used as a library, it's vacant. It was determined that it could be eligible to be listed. The owner wants to knock it down and put a gas station there, and it looks like he's gonna do that. It's not listed. If we approach that owner, he said there is a grant available to give advice and examples of adaptive reuse to try to convince this guy that he can make a profit by saving the building. Is there a grant available, and does it have to be a listed property to apply for that grant of adaptive reuse? Or is it a grant, or is it just advertising? That's my question.
It could be technical advice. Our recipients are only municipalities and nonprofits, so we wouldn't be able to give a grant to a private property owner for that purpose. But our office would certainly be available to provide technical assistance or advice.
We need somebody to come down and give the guy examples of how they've saved buildings like this and how you make it profit.
You know what, this is another job for the circuit riders. We as part of the contract, we have an emergency fund, which actually is fairly ready money.
So your office doesn't, we tried the circuit rider, we're not getting anywhere.
Well, in the interest of moving on, we can talk about that after.
We're always willing to have more conversations.
Yes, definitely. I'm Steve.
Hi, my name's Laura Boyer, I'm an architect. One of the things, and I'm working with an organization, I'm on the board of the Institute Library, and the library has sort of long-range plans, it has gotten some grants from the Neighborhood Assistance Act, it's looking at the Historic Restoration Fund. We've in the past had grants from the National Trust, and it can be very confusing sometimes where overlapping grants might conflict or not conflict in terms of how much sort of active, uncompleted grant you can have at one time. And I'm just wondering, and that just for long-range planning can be really confounding. And it's not always clear where the funding comes from. If it's bonded money, it doesn't have the same restrictions. And, I'm not being very clear because it's confusing. I'm just wondering if, like, where do you go to get a kind of big picture help with that for long-range planning, and also just as a sort of subset of that, my experience is that it's hard to understand how long a project can really take. I mean, there's some information here about how long it can take to get a grant, but then to do the work and to close out the grant, which you have to do before you can become eligible to apply for another grant, is something that people don't understand very well. And obviously it varies, and there are a lot of factors that can't be controlled. But I'm just wondering, is there any place of a database where people can look at past grants just to kind of see the way it used to, the way it has been? No promises made, because there could be unexpected things, but just to get a sense of what's realistic. Is there anywhere to go to see how it's been in the past? Overall timeline.
I mean, I could weigh in, but.
I mean, we can definitely help you with that too. I mean, we can help you with recreating the past, figuring out examples of grants that would be helpful to you. And in terms of the planning, I actually just worked with Mary Ann Ott in closing out Amateur Hour, which was a grant you had with us a few years ago. So if you're at that point now, I know you've had a lot of change in the last few years.
That's part of it too.
So just to be broad, we'd love to help you continue to deliver those humanities programs to the public, and if there's some planning assistance that would be needed, let's talk.
Question, we could do the life cycle of a grant-funded project. We could, and we could certainly provide examples of successful past applications. And we certainly could visit or talk to you and see where you are and kind of try to untangle, everything for you.
It's a tangle.
Yeah, so yeah, again, as they said earlier, as everybody said earlier, just call.
Okay, good.
A lot of people seem to actually do spreadsheets on their grant. I hate to say that. Yeah, when you want to talk to them, because you are perfectly, not when you inherit it.
If I'm understanding you right, it's sort of like grants that are for the same project but have overlapping time periods. This one starts here and ends here, and I was thinking the same thing, when we've had that, and with wooden boat restoration, which is, if you think houses are bad, but, because they're submersed in water and.
They live in water.
So that's what we've tried to do, and unfortunately, I have a wonderful finance office, they know money, they think in terms of money, and it's easier for them, but sort of that spreadsheet of showing some ways so visually in one glance, you can see, and we've done it with, if we have multiple, say federal grants or government grants, what is the amount, what is the match, what is the time frame, and have it all in one place, it begins to get a little bit more manageable.
Do you have like example templates of that kind of thing?
I do, I'd have to redact all the, the salary type things, but we could talk afterwards.
Yeah, and I actually have a template too. Liz and I have done a program called Work It from time to time in the past, which really starts to break down a project's needs into component parts and how you can start to think about them, map them out, overlay time, and we'd be happy to share those. Too much for what we were trying to do today, so we knew there'd be so many questions, but we've got those resources to share.
So it is time for lunch, I'm sorry, but I will stick around, find us at lunch, or I'll stick around here to answer any specific questions.
And Mary, we didn't get into this, but Mary printed out 2 case statements from Connecticut Humanities grants. One which you will see kind of answer the questions well, one of which less well. And if you want to grab one of those, I thought as a funder, these are the same question, the same character counts. These are the kind of things where we'll get 15 grants, so we're asking the same question. You can see how polar opposite things could be as you start thinking about doing your own applications.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.